What does a historically famous painter and modern UX have in common? Turns out a lot. We're going to explore exactly that connection in this lesson. How to use CTAs, calls to action, to improve your UX. Hi, I'm Mike Phillips, growth marketer and strategist with over 12 years of marketing experience. In this lesson, we'll explore 3 key things. We're going to define what we mean when we say call to action. We're going to explore why call to actions are so important to your content. And we will discuss how you can implement best practices to drive more performance. Let's start with some definitions. When we think about calls to action, we should think of the words of Pablo Picasso. Yes, that one. Pablo Picasso was known to say that action is the key to all success. Those words are just as relevant in modern digital UX. In order for your business to succeed, your customers need to take action. But not just any action. We need them to take the desired action that is necessary for your business success. This is specifically the actions that you plan for them to take so that the outcomes drive performance and ultimately revenue. This is where call to action comes into play. A call to action, or CTA for short, is plain text or a UI element with text that needs to direct a clear and specific action for your customer to take. All of those parts of that definition are key for it to be a high-performing call to action. The first part is it has to be text. It can't just be an image. A call to action that drives behavior needs to have language that communicates a clear idea. It needs to be clear, not clever. While witty copy is oftentimes impressive, especially to hook someone to read what you're writing, when it comes to asking for action, we must be clear rather than clever. Our call to action must be specific, not ambiguous, nor should it direct multiple options. A single specific choice is what is key. And in the end, a call to action must drive action. It must not provide new information for consideration. A call to action is placed where we need the customer to move beyond thinking about something and to begin doing something. So taken together, text, specific, clear, and action-oriented. Those 4 elements are how we will create a strong CTA. This is a CTA that will perform well when you implement it with best practices. So now that we know what it is, let's talk about why it matters to your content and how that fits into driving performance through SEO. CTAs are a very important part of driving performance from your well-written content. One of the key things that CTAs do is they eliminate decision fatigue by giving clarity to the buyer's journey. Customers nowadays have more options than they have ever had before. Regardless of the niche, regardless of how unique your selling position is, there are always options, even if we think the competition is not as good. To a consumer, they're faced with more information than they've ever had in history as a buyer. Chances are, by the time they consume your content, they may have consumed many other pieces, not just of yours, but of your competitors. Very quickly, this multiplies out. It's very easy to see if you are one of 3 or 5 possible fits in a market segment with 5 or 6 pieces of content in the buyer's journey. Your customer has consumed 30 pieces of content. They are fatigued. They don't have time, they have options. And so a call to action is about helping this journey by reducing fatigue, by inspiring action immediately. So if you happen to be earlier in that list of 30 pieces of content, if you're the one that's giving a clear path, perhaps the customer will say, you know what? This is the only one that makes me feel confident because I don't have to choose. I don't have to figure out where to navigate next, what to read next, what to think about next, who I should buy from. It's clear. You have asked them to take the necessary next step. And in that way, a call to action, even though it serves your performance, really serves your customer. Strong CTAs also direct the customer journey. They make this path to purchase simpler. Everyone likes to think about buy now as the call to action of choice, but there are many opportunities for you to use calls to action throughout the buyer journey. Learn more is often used earlier in the journey. Someone has been hooked and is consuming a piece of information, could be a social post, could be the hook of a longer blog post, and learn more gives them a chance to dive deeper. Think about what that experience would be like without learn more. If you don't give a clear direction of where to go, even if the next step is not purchase, your customer will feel fatigue of having to decide for themselves. Modern consumers make more choices today than they ever have before in every aspect of their digital lives. And so by the time they come to your content, you are just one more straw in a big pile that could, as the metaphor goes, break the camel's back. Don't be that last straw. Take a load off your customer and give clear steps throughout the buyer's journey. The last thing CTAs do is reduce friction to increase conversions. This is where we get to that buy now button. If we have poorly placed, or worse yet, a lack of calls to action, our conversion rate of our content will suffer. On the flip side, if we do it well, if we provide tasteful, well-placed, well-matched language in our CTA that suit the stage of the journey the buyer is in, our conversion rates will go up. This means more leads. This means better leads. This means more trust and less buyer fatigue, less sensitivity to pricing, more trust, and ultimately more revenue. That's a lot of results for the shortest copy on your website. Certainly, we've all been to websites that do CTAs wrong. Let's think about what those experiences were like. Perhaps the language was overly aggressive. Perhaps it was buy now, and you didn't even know whether you had a true need or not yet. Or worse yet, perhaps there were ambiguous steps. Maybe you had more than one calls to action, where there was truly a fork in the road and you did not know which path to take. Or perhaps you got to the buying stage and it wasn't obvious where or what to do to actually make your purchase. These are all examples of calls to action that have decreased the quality of the user experience. Oftentimes these are done either accidentally or at least inadvertently with an undereducated designer. You, being educated in the proper way to use this, can avoid these pitfalls. You can have better placement, better language, and the right type of call to action for the step in the buyer's journey your customer's at. They may not realize exactly why it feels so right, but in the end, your performance metrics and your revenue curve will show you that you've done it right. So now that we know why CTAs are so important to get right, let's study a few best practices that you can do to make sure you get the most out of this micro copy. The first thing you need to determine before you begin writing or placing or designing your call to action is what is your desired outcome for the stage of the buyer's journey your customer is in when they're consuming a given piece of content. If your blog post is a general education piece, if you have a deep dive white paper, if you have purchase copy right above the final shopping cart on an e-commerce website, each of these segments requires different desired outcomes. Of course, we have the desired outcome of a purchase as the final goal, but we know that by moving customers from oblivious to who we are and what their problem is, to paying for your solution, that requires many steps in between. Each of those steps needs to have a desired outcome. I recommend considering from the buyer's perspective, what would be the most helpful advisory step that moves them through the purchase process from consideration to purchase with the least amount of friction and decision fatigue. The number one reason buyers do not buy nowadays is not because of a competitor or because of better pricing or because of budget. It's simply because of analysis paralysis. Too many options or too much to consider or too difficult of a path to navigate is the primary reason buyers will not purchase. Eliminate this fatigue. Streamline this process by deciding on a practical next step at each stage of the journey. Early on in the buyer's journey, strive to have them learn the next thing they need to learn to become from aware to having a deep preference for the way you do business. When they have a preference, move them to consuming or interacting with your content, following, downloading, attending an event. After that step, you can begin moving them into actions that allow them to establish an intent to buy. These would be actions of comparison to judge whether or not to buy from you, as opposed to earlier where it was whether or not they needed it at all. As you can see, there are many different ways to develop calls to action in a buyer journey. Think this through with your product development team and your sales team. Oftentimes, both of those groups know a lot about what it takes to move this product and the specific pain points they were trying to solve. Mirror this in your language, and your sales cycle will be shorter and your product satisfaction will be higher. Not to mention better UX and content performance. The next important piece of designing calls to action is to use the best practice of hard versus soft language. If you think back to your perspective as a buyer, you've seen a lot of different calls to action out there. There is buy versus buy now. There is tell me more versus I want this. These are a couple of examples of hard and soft language. Oftentimes, especially if we come from a background of sales, we want our content to perform well, we know the end goal in mind of purchase, and we tend towards using hard language in every circumstance. But if we think about ourselves as a buyer, that buyer-centric mentality will show us that there are times for a softer option, especially early in the buyer journey when people don't yet have an affinity, a deep preference for our brand, our product, our solution. At that stage, we need to be earning our status as a trusted advisor. In fact, using hard language in the earlier stage can derail the buyer's journey by decreasing your trust. If you came in an in-person sales arrangement and were pushing for the sale right from the beginning of saying hello, your customer would feel uncomfortable and walk out of that store. Your digital content needs to follow the same practice. A soft, trust-earning language is critical at the beginning, while still reducing decision fatigue and moving them through the buyer's journey. Later on, when the trust is established and they need to know what to do next, you can tell them in certain terms that it's time to buy now. When it comes to choosing your words for a call to action, I mentioned earlier that clarity is so much more important than cleverness. I'm sure you've seen sites or other digital media where the call to action was wordy or poetic, or perhaps using advanced vocabulary that somehow mirrored something that was said earlier. Unfortunately, as artsy as those are, and I'm sure as much deliberate action on the part of the content creator as they took, they're just not effective in the eyes of the customer. To a customer, good marketing makes them feel smart, not you. And so this extends to calls to action. They should feel so confident in their steps that they're taking that they're educated, they're smart, because you've used simple and clear language in your calls to action. Poor examples of this would be higher level vocabulary words. Unfortunately, most people in an American market read at an 8th grade or lower reading level, regardless of their age. Choosing vocabulary at or below that level is a good first step. Further, not just the complexity of the words you choose, but the length of what that action statement is. We may want them to download in order to do something, but you'd never say, do X in order to Y in your call to action button. In this case, we must simplify what we say. Download. Download for later. That would be a softer language. Either way, it must be clear and simple language. This way, your customer knows exactly what to take. This is part of reducing decision fatigue. The last thing when it comes to language is that calls to action must be specific. This is no longer a time to persuade. If you feel that at this stage of your content, you still need to persuade, it's not appropriate to put a call to action. Use more body context to do the persuasion, the comparison, the education that they need. If you have done a good job with your content, the call to action will be a logical and comfortable next step. A call to action should be specific, a clear single step. It should not have multiple steps. It should not have multiple things to consider. It should not have options to weigh. It is about action, not information. One of the final best practices when it comes to CTA is high versus low intent placement locations. This is where we mix design and copywriting for best performance. A high intent customer is going to want to buy now, to book a demo, to download. These sorts of calls to action should be placed above the fold. Oftentimes when someone is a high intent customer, they have either already been consuming your content and are a returning user, or they are coming in with a strong and trusted referral from a variety of either attributable or non-attributable sources. They could have gotten a message in a Slack chat from a trusted colleague. They could have heard about your product on a podcast. All of these entry sources may use Google search to arrive at your site, but Google facilitated the access, and so they are not early stage buyers entering for the first time. How do we suit a buyer like this and mesh that up with someone who genuinely came in through SEO search, early stage learning? You'll see it in many strong sites where there is a call to action in the header to book a demo. That is always there. Because it's always there, when somebody enters that page as a visitor, but it is not their first time, nor is it perhaps early stage buying, these high intent customers will be able to self-convert right away. Above the fold or in the header, the top right area of a piece of content, for example, a blog post, are great positioning options for high intent CTAs. Lower intent CTAs are an opportunity to put inline conversions or bottom of page conversions. For example, a plain text link inside of a blog post that says learn more after an intriguing point is a wonderful opportunity for a soft language conversion for a lower intent buyer. This is somebody who will be a customer one day, but today needs to learn more before they're ready. They will move past the book a demo, the buy now button in the top of the page because they're just not ready yet. That doesn't speak to them. But they will see a learn more inline text or a subtle button, and they'll say, that's me. I want to learn more. You can actually serve high and low intent buyers in the same pieces of content with this method. Be sure to balance the language and the placement appropriately. And remember to not create ambiguous paths for the same buyer. In this example, we're able to create two paths for two different buyers consuming the same content with a different state of mind. It should always have the same language for each type of buyer. High intent buyers will always say buy now throughout one piece of content. Low intent buyers will always say learn more. This consistency gives a clarity. The customers will know where they belong, and there will be no confusion over what they should do next. I do want to add a word of caution that you should not overuse the context here of multiple calls to action. If you put in too many learn mores, they may not know which to do first. They may open too many tabs, become overwhelmed with content, and bounce. Similarly, when it comes to a high intent lead, there is only one thing they're interested in doing: navigating to purchase. Use the same language, the same design of that button, and similar placement so that they understand where to find it when they are returning to your site or arriving for the first time with a strong referral. The final piece I want to add is visual design. Calls to action can be plain text, hyperlinks, or they can be buttons. They could be graphical elements. There's a variety of ways that they can appear. Refer to your brand guideline document when it comes to designing and developing consistent usage rules for your calls to action. We mentioned this in a prior lesson, but it bears repeating here. Calls to action should be as on brand as your brand voice, as the overall site design, and as your product. Make sure that how you are hyperlinking, the changes to the style of the text that you use for a CTA is consistent and clear throughout your site. People who are engaging in multi-page sessions will appreciate this. Similarly, for your buttons or other graphical elements, decide on a narrow selection so that it is understandable in all contexts that this visual element is a call to action as well. Consistency is key here. Do this well, and you'll notice that your conversion performance is much higher than if you had too much variety in your call to action appearance. To recap, remember the important definition of what a call to action is: text that delivers clear, specific direction for action. Remember the importance of using a call to action well, how it can improve performance for your content, and the pitfalls of all those sites we've seen that don't quite hit the mark. And remember some of the key aspects of best practices, how you can implement calls to action, the language, the placement, the design, in order to drive the maximum performance from your content. Now I'd like you to take some of this knowledge and put it into practice with a homework assignment. Your homework assignment for this lesson is to take the best practices we mentioned in this lesson and begin to look at how you can apply them to your site. Look at your content and evaluate whether you hit or miss on each of the requirements. I recommend making a table. List down the side all of the best practices and put a good or not good other column, and put a check mark in each of those areas depending on whether you hit each one. As a reminder, we want to make sure that this table lists out that you have a clear desired outcome for the stage of the buyer's journey that the customer is in while consuming this content. You should make sure that you are using either hard or soft language and that you've selected the proper choice. The next piece is to evaluate whether you are using hard or soft language and that you've chosen the right one for your particular use case. You should make sure that you are being clear, not clever. Remember that cleverness may make us feel smart, but clarity makes our customer feel smart, and confident customers make purchases. We should make sure that we are being specific and not accidentally using our calls to action as a chance to persuade. We should make sure that the placement of our calls to action are appropriate for the high or low intent stage of the buyer's journey that our customer is in. And lastly, we should validate that the visual appearance, including hyperlink or button, are in line with our brand guidelines. When you build that table, go through a piece of content and grade each row, either as good or not good, and then consider how you made them miss and where an opportunity is to improve. Do you need to flip from hard to soft language, or vice versa? Do you need to move the placement of high intent CTAs higher in the page? Or is your language more clever than clear? Be honest and look at it through the eyes of the customer. Buyer centricity is the absolute key here. After you've made this evaluation, go through a revision process. We've talked about revision in a prior lesson. Implement that process to improve your calls to action. When you do this, make sure you compare the performance of the changes pre and post edit. Allow the data to steer the performance decisions. Ultimately, we may think we are being clear, but the numbers will bear it out. We may think we have an aesthetically pleasing location for our button, but if people aren't seeing it or engaging with it, the numbers will show us. trust the analytics, listen to your customers, and make all the necessary improvements. Do this, and you'll have reaped all the benefits of this homework assignment. You've reached the end of the lesson. By now, you understand what a CTA is and what it isn't. You understand why they're important to driving performance, and you understand some best practices that you can start to implement in your content. Thank you for learning with me. I'm Mike Phillips, and remember, action is the key to all success.